I never pictured my first trip to DC would be like this.
Julian Gerighty has the distinct pleasure, and I'm sure the pressure, of bringing us a Division sequel. What does it mean for you guys creatively? What can you do with the sequel that you couldn't do with the first game?
That's a fantastic question, because fundamentally it's been a lot of listening to our players, listening to the community, seeing how people were playing the first game, learning from the mistakes that we did on the first game. It wasn't a perfect game, but we've improved it enormously since launch. And taking all of that and seeing things that matter to us as a dev team and trying to push those things too. So it's been a mix of data, interviews, discussions, and then our own passions and how we've evolved as professionals too. One of the things that we took to heart was, how could we, keeping our soul in RPG, create a game that felt more like a shooter? So we've put more emphasis on the visceral nature of the shooting. We've got the specializations front-loaded by the signature weapons: 50 cal sniper rifle, the crossbow, and grenade launcher. We have a campaign that's going to take you through this open world, discovering different stories, both micro and macro, and Endgame is going to be a major focus of ours.
We want to add more replayability into the endgame. We want to hold back some elements that actually introduce totally new experiences into Endgame, and we want to give you really clear goals of why you want to get more power, why you want to keep expanding your toolkit. So we've added things like the raid to be this aspirational goal for players at the end. We've added the living world system to kind of make it so every time you log in, you're getting different experiences because it's an actual living simulation you're affecting. And we've added things like the Black Tusk that actually come in and invade not only the open world, but also the dark zones and the occupied dark zone and the invaded missions and strongholds.
The Black Tusks feel like kind of a mirror image of your own Division in a way. Yes. They seem to be as technically proficient, they seem methodical, like military strategists. Yes. They're really tough, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely, yeah, and they're meant to be. Not only do they fight smart, you'll see them strafing cover to cover and doing suppressive fire and trying to flank around you, but they also bring you toys, right? So you got the big dog, you got the heavy armored guy, which is a really unique experience for endgame players.
It suddenly turns into Metal Gear Solid at the end, which is crazy.
Yeah, we're really pushing it.
This is not an endgame just for hardcore players. It's an endgame with a progression, with a story that takes you places, and that we'll be following up with post-launch releases and stuff like that. That's something that's really unique to this game.
It must be excruciating, though, as designers, to kind of say, nope, we're not going to give that in the main camp. We'll hold all of that back until later. Sure. Is that a tough thing for you guys to go back and forth on?
Honestly, it wasn't. It was something we knew we were saving from the beginning, right? Because we started designing this game with this idea from day one of, okay, we're going to invest in the end game. So it didn't feel like something we had held back. It felt like something we were adding back in. But we really want the end game to just feel like this continuation of your journey. So the end game content, as they invade missions and take over strongholds, they almost feel like these little mini campaigns that just keep pulling you along.
Can you take us into the lore of the second game a little bit, just sort of encapsulate what's happening for us?
So the first game was built around a New York City that was suffering the aftershocks of this pandemic being let loose in the city. The government tried to contain it, didn't work so well. The virus spread across the nation, across the world. This is 7 months after the events of the Division 1. Right. So the collapse has just worsened. It's just got worse. And that transformation is what we're seeing within one of the most powerful cities in the world, Washington, D.C. And if there's one city that should have held, if there's one city that should have had a plan for this, it's Washington. They didn't. So one of the storylines is going to be to discover, okay, just what happened here? How did it all fail catastrophically? But that's in the background. The real main purpose of you going here is to help rebuild the Division, get that foothold on the city, rebuild the base of operations, which just happens to be the White House, and then help the civilians, help them get a control on their lives, get them water, get them food, get them medicine, get them the resources that they need to rebuild.
So where is the hope in this game? And as developers, does it get tougher to be in that world for extended periods of time? Because you're not talking about touchy-feely, happy stuff. This is really brutal fiction, really brutal commentary that you're crafting.
But this is where I feel it's our responsibility as a dev team to create a world where there is hope. And that hope is worth defending. If there wasn't, there'd be no need for the Division. So Hope for me is represented by the settlements and the civilians trying to survive in these settlements.
After months of resilience, we have survived the virus outbreak that crippled our country.
I talked to Julian a little bit about this. This is such depressing, dark stuff to get lost in.
Yes.
Does it ever become too much for you guys? Do you carry this narrative, especially when you read the news and there's a lot of doom and gloom in the real life news? Do you ever pack that around or have to go for a walk on the beach or something to, sort of de-stress around this stuff?
As you're researching areas and what happens with things like smallpox and how an environment would degrade around you, I get worried about my Google search history sometimes. We're following in the tradition of Clancy and these heightened situations, and it's a fantasy world, right? And so I think there's a lot of adventure to be had.
The first game really focused a lot on the technologies that were available to these elite fighters, and this game it feels much more primitive and rooted, and things aren't working. There's been more breakdown that's been happening, right? How did you balance giving us the toys but also giving us the ruin?
The toys are still there, but we always wanted to make the game as grounded and realistic and relatable as possible. This could be you. This could be you.
Especially
fighting.
in 2019, right?
Maybe even more so in 2019 than 2016. But this was really about building a world that felt like something that you could imagine yourself living through. And a pandemic is an absolutely possible thing.
Yeah.
Chaos in the streets is an absolute possible thing.
Yeah.
And it's asking that question of, if this happened, what would you do? Where would you be? Would you be one of those people who shows the best of humanity, or would you, be somebody else?
Is there a strategy for people that are like griefing others? Is there any kind of a punishment system or something that you guys are working on? Because I know there's a lot of scumbags out there that take advantage of the noobs that just pick them right off.
Well, I will say a big goal this time was to make it more fair. The first game was an experiment. It was a social experiment, and some of the stories that came out of it were honestly amazing. But there was a huge amount of players that wasn't for them, right?
It really was the dark zone.
It really, it was not the friend zone. So in the sequel, we've done a couple things. One, we're trying to, reduce toxicity between players a little bit. Yeah. So we've just done subtle changes to things like voiceover in proximity, right? But then we've also added a layer of normalization to the RPG so that I can feel confident, even if I'm not the player who's spent, 1,000 hours, if I've just hit Endgame and collected a little bit of gear, I can feel confident going in there that my stats behind the scenes are being leveled out, and it's going to be more about my shooter skills. So there's a lot of little aspects that I think are going to make it more fair, more inviting. I think the game really shines for sure when you're in a 4-player group, or like when the raids drop an 8-player group. But we also know there's a huge amount of players that just want to get on and play by themselves, or they just want to get on and have a 30-minute session. And a lot of the stuff we've done is very suited towards solo players as well. So the open world stuff kind of scales to your group size, and it's something you can totally get on and tackle a short challenge and have a fun gameplay session. Even the Dark Zone has this idea in the background running where if I'm a solo player, I'm more likely to see other solo players and not 4-player groups. So you can play how you want.
We're at the tail end of the console lifespan for the Xbox and the PlayStation 4, and developers are really familiar with that architecture. We're starting to see brand new graphic cards from NVIDIA that are just blowing us away right now. What technically are you achieving with The Division 2 that you couldn't with the first game, and maybe what separates the top-end PC experience from the console game?
I think in general, we've always had this philosophy of getting the best out of every single platform.
Yep.
So we really develop it as a one game, one team sort of proposal. I think a super high-end PC experience, you're going to have those options that allow you to get the most out of frame rates, adapting the UI to exactly how you want it to
multiple
look like.
screens.
Multiple screens,
Right.
that type of thing. The things that I love is how familiar all of the teams working with Snowdrop on this game are with what the tool can bring to them. So we're squeezing that much more out of it. The whole world was built using GIS data and LiDAR data, and that helped us build a one-to-one recreation of Washington City without the transformation. There was a huge amount of work to create the transformation there.
Yeah.
But that really helped us cut hundreds of man-months out of the creation of that base Washington, D.C.
What is the end of Endgame? And when does this game end?
Yeah. Well, what I'll say is it's going to keep evolving, right? We want this to be a thing where you can get on and you can play the campaign and you should feel like you had a complete experience. But for the player who really wants to dive in, we're going to be supporting it for a long time. So the raid's only the start. We're going to have 3 big episodes that add expansions to the world, different story missions. We're going to add modes to our conflict PvP experience. So honestly, it's going to keep going for a long time.
So there is no end in this game.
It's a brave new world.
This is our defining moment. Our chance to take back our country. Our chance to shape history.